Good morning, Michigan. Grab your middle ground coffee and let's reset. This Sunday edition, your Michigan news, faith, family, and forward focus. No left, no right, forward. Don't forget to subscribe to the Finding the Middle newsletter, your deeper dive into Michigan and national stories every week at www.themiddlegroundmike.com/newsletter. All right, let's get into it. We'll talk a little bit about a week in review. We're still talking about the budget fight. I believe they're still, it's about an $80 billion budget fight. It's still passed in July. It's still under fire. Some sources say Democrats are pushing for higher K through 12. They want per pupil spending now at about $9,700 per student. Republicans are arguing that this is unsustainable, pointing to the state $600 million budget shortfall for 2026. The middle take Parents don't care about partisan wins. They don't when it comes to their children. They want teachers, textbooks / iPads these days, and safe classrooms. A lot of people have special needs kids. I have one of them. This is $600 million is a lot of money. It's got to come from somewhere. So, where does that come from? Part of an issue is that the roads gas tax revenue is declining because higher mileage vehicles, you get more per gallon. The people that are transitioning to electric vehicles, that really hits home. That's brings down the revenue. Then they try to substitute it from other places. There's plenty of areas where they can trim from. I know a lot of people do not like it, but we really got to look at that and, maybe tackling some of the Michigan administration for schools from what I know is we're very top heavy. And I'm not talking about the teachers. Maybe revisiting some of that, would be a good place to start. That's just my thoughts on that. Obviously, I'm not a, dedicated education professional. When it gets down to it, uh, Detroit's economic pulse, has it's directly tied into it. They're seeing a surge of construction around Ford Field, the Hudson Site Tower, local businesses benefiting from the Lions home games because now they're like crazy. And even though the Tigers have been in a slump recently, the Tigers are, they're drawing attention. The Lions drew over 65,000 fans to their opener. Some saying are the biggest in years, but I believe there's been a couple that are right up there with it. But it's driving millions into local businesses down there. We have to keep doing that. And I know, Tigers are definitely helping. The Red Wings had a good spurt last year. The Pistons are looking better. So that's good overall. More people are starting to move in downtown, and when you kind of factor that into some of the jobs and stuff, right? Michigan's still employing over 175,000 auto workers. But EV transitions, they're causing some tension, right? Ford delayed EV projects in Flat Rock due to supply costs. They're saying GM's committing another 1.5 billion in Michigan EV production, but I've heard that may be on pause and they may be trying to push some gasoline engines right now. The unions are remaining split among this, right? Because supporting clean energy jobs, but they're wary of their membership getting laid off. And those are good paying jobs. Those are jobs that people can afford to buy a house, a car, put a kid through college. Well, this isn't some pipsqueak job. These people make good money. So there is a concern there, right? Well, I know a lot of people don't like to hear it, but some of those tariffs in place are going to protect some of those jobs, which we need, So I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but it's just a fact of life. Let's kind of get a little bit into segment 2, right? What's Michigan really talking about over some coffee? Get yourself some middle ground coffee while you're at it. AAA is saying the current statewide average is $3.57 a gallon, with Metro Detroit a little higher. I don't know where AAA is looking, but I know in a lot of areas down by my house, it's a little bit cheaper than that, like closer to the $3 range. Schools, the shortages continue. Michigan has over 2,000 open teaching positions. And last time I looked, I believe Michigan's in the bottom half of teacher pay. That's despicable. How are we supposed to educate our kids? Our kids are going to get left behind because we're not taking care of the teachers and we're not holding our own kids accountable when they're acting like jerks. The teachers don't want to be there. This is it just is what it is. We've got to do better by the teachers. We can definitely pay some teachers some more by, hey, going after some of the top heavy area we were talking about a little bit ago. Put some more money in the teachers' pockets, put some more resources into the classrooms without having to raise taxes. It's just a simple solution to me. Again, I'm not a pro, it's just an opinion. We'll kind of talk a little bit, the Lions hype. It's real. After years of disappointment, they're still Vegas favorites to win the NFC North. But I don't know with how Green Bay looked against us in that opener, it's bouncing back and forth. But the Lions did come back against Chicago and lay a 50 burger on them, and that was a fun game to watch. Now, hopefully on Monday night we can beat the Ravens. That'll be a tough one because I believe the Ravens gave us a run for our money last time. So let's really hope they can keep it up. Isaac Tesla, he makes some crazy catches, like Calvin-esque almost. Now I'm not calling him Calvin Johnson, but man, he's got those hands, right? So what I don't get is when we were struggling against Green Bay, why did we wait so long to go to the young man? I mean, you were getting your butt kicked. What's the worst that could happen? He catches it. Oh, wait, he does. I'm not again. It's just armchair quarterbacking there, but hopefully we got a really, really good game plan this week. I trust the coaches. Dan Campbell's given us reason to trust him. So let's talk a little bit about voices from the mitten. There's a lot of local businesses that have opened up downriver. I believe there is a new Indian restaurant in Flat Rock. We tried, it wasn't too bad. I liked it. But you got what was that one place they opened up here recently? Oh, yeah, that's right. They opened up a Culver's. You got things like that. Send me your Michigan story. Email me, message me, drop a comment below. Sundays are about real local voices. If you want me to do a local episode on your town or your area and you want to join in, let me know. Let's do it. But, faith and family, right? In Michigan, 38% weekly or semi weekly, higher than the national average of people. That's 31% are going to church. And now with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, that number is going to go up. A lot of churches were packed to the rim last week. Now, granted, that probably all won't stick around, right? That's going to dwindle down a little bit. But even if it does dwindle down, a lot of those people that dwindles down, those beliefs are starting to get fired up in them again. So some of those values are going to come back out. Even if they don't attend church all the time, those values are starting to come back up in them. I'm not necessarily on Charlie Kirk's values, but I'm saying those religious values, that conscience that they want to have. It's really starting to, kick back in. Over 100 church-led food drives ran statewide this summer. That is a great thing. And I know a lot of that comes from donations, fundraisers. Great job, Michigan. That is putting food in people's mouths that cannot afford them, especially in these crazy times, because Lord knows grocery bills are insane. And families in West Michigan still gather around for Sunday dinners, a tradition that unites across generations. Yeah, because I can say in Southeast Michigan, that is definitely not the tradition it used to be. So I'm glad it's still a tradition somewhere in the state. Faith and family aren't partisan. They're what keeps Michigan grounded. Even when politics goes sideways, we've got to love our family. We've got to believe in everything. And you have to have that faith, whether it's faith in God, faith in everything you do. We have to stop ripping each other apart. We're allowed to disagree. We're allowed to have different visions. It's okay. You don't have to hate one another for that. You should take pride in that. You know, we talk about civility, right? That's Michigan's welcomed over 7,000 Afghan and Ukrainian refugees since 2021. It's something that Democrats like to highlight. But I don't think that should be a highlight. I think we should be talking about the fact that in Michigan, a lot of immigrants seem to integrate pretty well. I know a lot of immigrants who I would call them good friends. They integrate here pretty well, pretty darn well. But critics argue the state is still struggling with housing shortages. They're saying Michigan is lacking 190,000 affordable houses, right? So how do you house people? Michigan should honor its humanitarian tradition and protect its residents from being squeezed out of affordable housing. There's got to be some kind of incentives to build affordable housing, which I know they're doing in Detroit and things like that. It's a hard one to do, right? But we really, really, really need to focus on how to build affordable housing. Do we do it with different parts? Not different parts, different materials. How can we do this, right? It can't just be about subsidizing everything. We have to find new and innovative ways to make it happen. If we subsidize everything, it becomes a downward spiral that never ends. And then we end up in these huge projects that the government spends all kinds of money on and nobody really gets a benefit out of. So how can the government, how can maybe even universities help builders find a way to build affordable housing while they still make a profit? We do this, boom. I mean, trust me, companies, if they can make a profit and make it affordable so that you'll buy it, they'll build it. That's just the way capitalism works, right? Or a market based economy works. Part of like we were talking with the budget shortfall earlier, Michigan's income tax rate, due to how the law is set up with it, dropped to 4.05% in 2023 due to a revenue surplus. Republicans are saying Democrats want it raised again. Well, if it goes up a quarter of a point, I get that's money because money come out of all of our pockets, but does it help that build up that shortfall with barely anything coming out of our pockets? And we can help shore some of that up, get the teachers what they need. And again, let's go after that top heavy aspect. We need to go after all these top heavy things in the state. You know, a stable tax policy is better than the roller coasters that are going on right now. They make it impossible for families and businesses to plan, which leads to less investment. I'm not even talking about tariffs. I'm talking about right here in Michigan. We have to do better than that. Just like the state commission is authorizing a DT rate hike, or I'm sorry, they're good chance they're going to. And it'd be like the third or fourth one in as many years, if not less. We're talking about we're pinched over here, but yet DT produced over $1 billion in profit, and we're going to let them raise prices. It's supposed to be a public utility nonprofit. And I don't want to hear this. Oh, they're bearing lines and everything. Yeah, they're bearing lines in super wealthy areas. They're not bearing very many lines in the average person's area. So, let's use some common sense here. Stop raising taxes, raising energy rates on people that can't afford it. Should be raising in general with that much money, and take that to where it is. I mean, we have to do better with that. Let's look forward, Michigan, right? We're number 3 in the Midwest for clean energy job growth in 2024, adding over 5,000 new positions, which is great. It's jobs, right? And those jobs tend to be good paying jobs. We need more of them. One of the things that I would really like to see Michigan do is get into more of a hydrogen power for vehicles, liquid hydrogen vehicles, hydrogen combustion. You know, I feel like that's a better option long term in colder climates. Check out some of the research on that. Obviously, in its current state, it's not as necessarily efficient as electric because the grid is not like the infrastructure is not as built out as it is for EVs at the moment. But long term, to me, it's a more sustainable thing. You don't have to build as many power plants. It's easier to deliver the product. It's easier to fuel it. You don't have to worry about charging constantly. And, they have different options where it's part electric, part hydrogen fueled. It gives us some more options, especially in cold climates. I know Europe is testing it, Australia is testing it. I believe Japan is, but I could be wrong. Michigan research, new cancer treatment trials are showing some promise. Grand Rapids has now ranked top in the US for fastest growing small cities. I mean, those are some good things that are happening here. Michigan is not defined by our fights. We're defined by our resilience. We've been through the last decade and we bounced back, and Detroit bounced back. So if we can do that, we can do anything. Forward is the only direction we're going. That's your Michigan Sunday Reset, Finding the Middle local edition. Don't just consume the noise, find the middle. Subscribe to Finding the Middle Ground newsletter. Grab your Middle Ground coffee and keep building civility in your own backyard. Until next time, no left, no right, forward.